So first and foremost, thank you all for having me. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Hariharan, for the invitation, and the two speakers that preceded me for literally setting up the stage so beautifully and so inspirationally. It's really hard for me to overstate what a privilege it is for me to be here with you all and to talk about a subject that's really important. It's also hard for me to overstate what an honor it is to talk to a crowd of professionals that have so much experience in sustainability and green business. Many of you have more than a decade, maybe 2 decades of experience in this work, and you all are literally the brains of the business world of the world of business in the world's 3rd largest economy. So honestly, the ultimate resource here, it's not me, it's every single one of you. So I have a request for especially those of you who are here in the audience. If you are here someone that you're working on an environmental issue, if you're an entrepreneur or a business leader or researcher, if you could take a minute, write your name, where you're located, and what you're working on in the chat box, and maybe a short description, but just try to keep it short. But my hope today is to offer you some insight, some nugget of wisdom that can help you think about the challenge that you are facing and how to overcome them. But I just want to set expectations that I myself am not an entrepreneur. I'm an environmental economist. I'm a researcher. I typically consult with water utilities to try and figure out how they can get insight from their data. And then I also work on projects that can help policymakers at different levels of government to make informed decisions. But that being said, in my mind, we're really 2 sides of the same coin. At the end of the day, every one of us here, we're looking for ideas. We're looking for ideas that work and ideas that can inspire and make a difference. Some of us think of the ideas, some of them, like you all in the business world, bring them to life, and other of us in the research world study them to see how well they work. So I'd like to start today with a definition. If you look up or you ask someone what a green or blue entrepreneur is, they'll tell you something along the lines of it being about connecting the entrepreneurial drive and spirit. And then what Mr. Berry was talking about, the needs of the planet and the desire for a greener and bluer future. And that's a fine definition. But for me, there's something missing. And I think Mr. Berry's talk got at this point. There's something, for me, that what a truly successful green entrepreneur is someone who's able to recognize environmental challenges, environmental threats, but not see them as threats, but as opportunities to create solutions that either allow us to continue to enjoy life as we know it, or help us adapt to new realities. This often starts with recognizing problems that may be right in front of us, but also involves a long-term vision and a willingness to imagine a world a future where we may do things differently. The best example of the kind of innovation that I'm talking about that solves these big important problems is the story of Dr. Borlaug, who was an agronomist who in India and Pakistan people refer to as the father of the Green Revolution for his accomplishments that he got a Nobel Peace Prize for in 1970. In the 1950s, when he did a lot of his work, the big challenge of the time was how to feed a world where the population was exploding, but also where crops were dying. Through a lot of trial and error, Dr. Borlaug figured out how to breed disease-resistant wheat varieties, and in doing so, saved millions of people around the world from hunger. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the point that I'm trying to make is that we're looking for green entrepreneurs and blue entrepreneurs of the Borlaug variety. We all know about climate change, but climate change is the tip of the iceberg, and there's so many more problems. And this is exactly what the speakers preceding me talked about. There's so many more problems in the world. And a lot of this has to do with the way we misuse and waste a lot of the natural resources. And climate change is just making things worse. So with that background in mind, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I found in my research on innovation in the water sector and what lessons this has for you. So I've got good news and I've got bad news for you. Because I'm an optimist, I'm going to start with the bad news. So from my research on the water sector, I can tell you that there's unfortunately good reason to believe that entrepreneurs are not particularly great at either recognizing or treating climate-related threats as opportunities. In the news, I'll see articles almost daily about how there's a lot of faith in the power of technology and our ability to innovate our way out of problems like water scarcity, an issue that I care deeply about. For example, it's not uncommon to see headlines about how a new technology will save us from water scarcity, like the ones you're seeing on the screen. But the reality is that that's not what's happening. And then we're seeing serious, and then there's serious concern that the water sector isn't innovative enough. I'll read you quickly a quote from an important academic paper on water innovation that it makes this point. So experts and policymakers are concerned that technology cannot deliver solutions that are commensurate with the impending stresses on urban water systems. And you can see this from the picture on the slide. So if you look at patenting activity in the United States for water, it's a lot lower compared to energy or the environment sector in more generally. So for me, this raises a question. Can we innovate our way out of a problem like water scarcity? And in my research, I find that the answer is unfortunately not really, at least not without help. But just to give you an idea briefly about what I mean by innovations in the water sector, I mean, technologies that promote water conservation. So things like leak detection, toilets that use less water, crops that are drought resistant. Technologies that augment water supply. So technologies that, on the desalination front, making it more feasible. Water reuse, groundwater pumping, and so on. All right, so I gave you the bad news. Let me give you the good news. So in my research, I also studied the role of water technology clusters. And I find that they're really good at boosting innovation. I study this in the context of water in the United States. But this model has been used in other sectors all over the world. But just to give you an idea, what are water technology clusters? Well, there's no precise definition and there's a lot of debate over the specifics, but it's a concept, honestly, not too dissimilar from organizations like the Indian Green Building Council or like the World of Water Action Forum or Global Waterworks and other organizations. What technology clusters are they're basically connector organizations. They're able to connect industries in a particular location with other actors that have an established presence in that location. So often what the problem is that you'll have a lot of the right actors all in one place, but they lack awareness of each other and they just don't know of the potential connections that they have with other organizations, research, their capabilities, their projects. But once they become aware of each other, of the potential synergies between them, they can start to engage in joint research, in collaboration, and innovation will happen. So basically the idea behind technology clusters is they act as structures that help put pieces of a puzzle together. They're remarkably good at bridging the gap between research and ideas that often come out of universities and the successful commercialization of new products. And in a way that really leverages a location's particularly existing strengths. So in the US, the context that I studied, it's the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, that began an initiative, a technology cluster initiative in 2011, and supported 18 or so water technology clusters around the country. And they provided a lot of support for networking, a lot of support for meetings, funding, and regulatory guidance. So those of you here in the audience today that are entrepreneurs, you know better than anyone how, if you have experience bringing a product to market. I list some barriers to innovation on the slides. Many of you have lived one or more, or maybe others as well, of these barriers. The reality, unfortunately, is that there's so many ways for a truly game-changing, phenomenal idea to just die. Unfortunately, the best technologies are not always the ones that win in the marketplace. And this is exactly what the previous speaker was talking about. At the risk of oversimplifying, I would say there are two big picture problems with innovation. The first is risk. At early stages, entrepreneurs face a lot of risk making a potential product that maybe no one will want. Maybe there's not enough funding. Maybe they won't find the right talent to work on the product. In later stages, when there's a minimum viable product or the product is market ready, it's now the end users that are worried about taking on risk. And I can tell you, no one wants to take a chance on an unproven technology. For example, if you're marketing an idea that you hope will be rolled out to an entire city, that's going to revolutionize how something works. or you're marketing something to a utility to improve their operations. They're going to need assurances that the technology is reliable, and of course that it can be scaled cost effectively. This is especially true in the water sector, and I'm sure other green sectors as well. The risk factor, really, it doesn't make it easy for investors to put their money behind a new technology, a new potentially high risk innovation, technological innovation. Instead, they'll prefer to invest in companies where they can get a rapid and a more sure return on their investment. So something like Uber or social media, for example. The second big picture problem is that people often forget that solutions are place-based and context-specific. The causes of a particular problem and the causes of that problem may be the same in different parts of the world, but the solutions that work in one place may not necessarily be appropriate or feasible for another place. Local factors play an incredibly important role. So things like cultural norms, social practices, and of course the physical environment. And that's where technology clusters can work their magic. They can act as incubators. They can provide mentorship, entrepreneurial training. They can provide guidance around business culture for the specific industry that you're interested in, or that they can help with, that they have expertise in. And they can teach entrepreneurs how to build networks and facilitate introductions. They can also act as accelerators for companies that are further along in their development. Again, with helping with the network aspect. So connecting people with other entities like universities or other companies that would be a good match. They can also provide, and this is probably one of the most important things, provide opportunities to make available facilities to test their products, make sure they work, engage with focus groups, so they can figure out how end users would interact with the product, to understand if there's something missing, something that either will make the product not marketable, or if there's a problem with the product, and try to find a way to address it. And then they'll showcase pilot products. And this is especially important to help end users broadly understand how the technology works and reduce some of that adoption risk. And lastly, they also can help provide entrepreneurs with on-the-ground market intelligence. They can help with market penetration and understand the landscape that they're working with. So what does this all mean for you? In general, I have four key takeaways for you. The first is that local partnerships and collaborations matter, and that's why I request that you engage in the chat. And so I encourage you to take a minute to look at the chat responses and see what connections you can make. The second is that technology clusters can help foster innovation and help foster collaborations, but you don't have to be in one. So if there isn't one in your area in India, for example, it doesn't matter, you don't have to be in one to take advantage of some of the qualities that they drive their success. The organizations like the Indian Green Building Council, like the World of Water Action Forum, they fill a lot of the roles of technology clusters. They have vast networks and connections with universities, governments, and other companies that you can potentially tap into. The one thing that may be potentially missing is the technology testing and the giving technologies a stamp of approval. I know the Green Building Council has certifications for green products, but I'm not sure if that involves actual testing of technologies. Maybe there's something that exists or something that's in the works, but if it's not, it's something worth thinking about. Third, and this is maybe my bias, but there's no green without blue. The larger discussion about we have about going green, it's my impression that the water aspect of things is either left out of the conversation entirely, or it's minimized. From my perspective, we can be aggressive about adopting greener technologies or greener policies, but the strategy is incomplete if we forget that everything that is green is going to be related to something that is blue. If you want an example, you can take energy. Every form of energy that we currently produce and rely on uses huge amounts of water for cooling and washing. And something like water scarcity can severely constrain the production of clean energy. What I'm trying to say is that we basically forget that green cannot exist without blue, both in a literal sense and a figurative sense. So my advice to you is that it would be a good idea for you and your business to find people that specialize in water to be on your team. And that can be an environmental scientist who understands water quality. It could be a hydrologist who understands water resources, or it could be a water economist to think about how people interact with water and environmental resources more generally. The last takeaway is that innovation goes beyond just technology. I talked about technology, innovation, adoption, the problems with those, but I also talked about it in the context of a policy initiative. And so there's a real need to think about innovation in policy, but also in business models to allow for more innovative culture. And a lot of that has to do, like the previous speaker was talking about, youth and engaging the youth. Just a note of caution though, technology clusters can be fragile ecosystems. Some fail to launch and others fail after launch. I don't know all the reasons why, but when I was doing my research, I came across several examples of those that failed, and those are the ones that I have on the screen. When I was preparing for this presentation, I was doing some Googling to look, to find out more about why they failed, and I noticed that actually some of them came back. Two of them came back to life anyway. The ones on the left side of the screen. The first one, the main reason why it failed is that they were spreading their attention too widely, and the participating firms didn't really see a benefit from engaging, and so there wasn't enough buy-in. The second one, in their first iteration, the Surge Accelerator, in their first iteration, featured water very prominently. But in the second iteration, they're not featuring water that prominently. They're mostly concentrated on energy, and water is more of a subcategory, and that probably has to do with a lot of risk that's in the water sector. And more of a, just to give you a big picture landscape of what's going on in the United States, the EPA, who started the initiative in 2011, had to stop supporting the technology cluster in 2018. And from my understanding, it left quite a big gap. Today, it's the Water Environment Federation who's now supporting the initiative, but they just don't have the same resources that a federal agency, namely the EPA, was able to provide. And because of the amount of risk that's involved in the water space, the amount of support that the EPA was able to bring is absolutely an essential component of success. I don't want to leave you on a low note, so I'll leave you on a high note. There's a lot of really good examples of successful technology clusters. In the water space, you can go to the Water Environment Federation and look up and find the list. I also, from my perspective, highlight the ones that I think are the most innovative or the most successful, and those are the ones on the right part of the screen. And you can go to their websites, and you'll find a ton of example success stories out there from the companies and startups that they supported, that benefited from their support. And you can find, you'll find testimonials and different resources about what exactly that they found useful. In general, unfortunately, there's no comprehensive list of technology clusters, but there is, in the US, there's a cluster mapping project that researchers at Harvard are working on, and that maps out where clusters are likely to exist. So if you're looking to see more about, a particular industry, you can go on that website, and that'll be a good starting point. In Europe, there's the TCI network that does a lot of the work on clusters, and they have a lot of information on their website. So that's hopefully that was useful to you, and hopefully there was some insight there. But at this point, I'll thank you all for your time, or Danyavad, I should say, and